Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Biden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittle.sportshop.com.
What does it take to be the leader in production systems technology? To be the one company that solves production problems at any plant, for any product, and with any technology? It takes a 30-year record of success. It takes total mastery of complex technologies with a history of delivering success every time, without fail. Only one company can claim that high ground in manufacturing line optimization, data automation, and systems integration, and that's Philadelphia Control Systems. In factories worldwide, Philadelphia Control Systems programs, software, and engineering solutions deliver optimal performance and output flow with a record that can't be matched. Any plant, any product, any technology. Philadelphia Control Systems, the leader in production automation since 1982. 800-335-9811. PCS4automation.com. That's PCS, the number 4, automation.com.
Oh, how I'm longing for the day when I'm back at Orchid Bay, where the silver water glistens in the sun.
When is the last time you raced a small boat across wide open water? Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's A-B-A-C-O. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
Now hear this. Man your battle stations.
The Obama attack on our Constitution continues. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com and join J.D. Benier and Christina Lamb and hundreds of Reagan conservative commandos who demand our country return to its founding documents and principles. We are part of the nation's oldest and largest GOP volunteer organization, the National Federation of Republican Assemblies. We register voters, endorse conservative candidates, and dig deep to give you the truth on the big issues. We are fighting to do what Lincoln proclaimed 150 years ago. Let the people know the facts and the nation will be free. Help support the Conservative Commando Radio Show with your donation today. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com. INRASuperPAC.com.
Now hear this. Man your battle stations.
From the East Coast to the West Coast and around the world on the Internet. We're coming to you live from the CCRS studios, WNJC 1360 and WIFI 1460. This is the Conservative Commandos Radio Show with your host, Rick Trader. The Conservative Commandos Radio Show, where the newsmakers go to be heard. You can call the Conservative Commandos Radio Show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
And welcome, everybody. Welcome, fellow patriots, and welcome once again to the Conservative Commandos Radio Show. I'm Rick Trader, coming to you live from the CCR studios, that of WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, the way we do, Monday through Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and around the world on the Internet via our Internet broadcast partners, CPRWorldwideMedia.com, PatriotsRide.org, and VigilantLibertyRadio.us. And joining me today as a special guest host here on the Conservative Commandos Radio Show is a very good friend of mine, Daria Novak. Daria is a former Reagan appointee who served in the U.S. Department of State and later ran for U.S. Congress in Connecticut. Today, she's the president of the Institute for American Politics. Its mission is to promote the study of the American political progress and the U.S. Constitution based on the idea that an active and knowledgeable citizenry is the best guarantee for a free and civil society. Daria, welcome to the Conservative Commandos Radio Show.
It's always fun to be here.
Great to have you with us today, Daria. And Daria, we do have a great show for our listeners, but something I wanted to get into with you. I know you worked at the Department of State during the Reagan administration, and that yesterday, in fact, marked the 25th anniversary of the massacre at Tiananmen Square. Many Americans know that day by the image of a lone man who stood in front of a Chinese tank and dared to defy Beijing's brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protesters. Now, Daria, I know you were involved in that, or not involved in the demonstration or the protest or the crackdown, but you were very involved in monitoring what was going on there for the State Department. And I thought it'd be great to have you on today to talk about some of your memories of that.
Well, you know, it really was a dramatic period there. I was working in the East Asian Bureau for the Assistant Secretary of State at the time, and it was actually incidents leading up to June 4th that are interesting, as well as the actual date of June 4th when things really exploded. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many Americans are aware of it, but students were involved in demonstrations even during the mid-1980s as they were trying to get more liberalization going, policy change in the country. One of the professors, Fang Li Zhi, had been going around the country talking about democracy and freedom and liberty, and he became a very popular speaker. And what happened with the Chinese is that they would try with economic reform, release some products so they were not under price control. Then they would put them back on. Well, as you can imagine, if someone's squeezing you and then taking off that squeeze, it really upsets society there. So there was a lot of instability during the 1980s. And you may remember the name Deng Xiaoping, who was head of the government. Well, his favorite word in those days was that they had to avoid what they call luan. And luan is the Chinese word for chaos or for disorder. So above anything else, Chinese society in the 1980s was experimenting with liberalizing, but they couldn't allow it to happen too much because disorder or disarray could challenge the single-party rule. It's almost like a little bit like in this country now, where the federal government declares veterans a threat, you know, different crazy things that are going on in Washington right now. If you disagree with the government, you're an enemy of the state, that type of thing. Yeah. Students were going through that. The people of China were. During that time period.
You know, Daria, as you're describing that, it almost reminds me of something that I heard Thomas Jefferson say about slavery in this country. It's like holding a wolf by the ears. You dare not hold on, and yet you dare not let go.
You know, that's what the Chinese were trying to experiment with. They had strongmen leaders like Mao Zedong, dictators like Deng Xiaoping. Deng was a pragmatist, and he knew that if he was going to save China, to modernize China, they had to liberalize, to allow free enterprise and trade in. So this is the period during the 1980s after we opened up our relationship a few years earlier with China, that they're starting to experiment with free market policies. Now, mind you, they were very minute, but for China it was a a big deal. If you went into China in those days, you could go into the marketplace and they open up a garage door and inside will be 3 or 4 tables and a little entrepreneur making some fish and other, fried foods and serving it to you, and that would be a free enterprise restaurant. And they were expanding these small businesses in and around Beijing and in the countryside during those days. Now, the government would allow a certain amount of it, but if these people became too independent or voiced expressions against the Chinese government, they became a threat if they opposed the government. So what happened is their leader, if you will, Hu Yaobang was one of them, was in charge of making sure that this disorder did not happen. And he was accused by the Chinese government of being too soft on the students, too soft on demonstrators wanting freedom. And he ends up dying, from whatever reasons, apparently a heart attack, on April 15th, 1989. That's actually when the students started marching to Tiananmen Square, and they stayed in that square for months. You may remember the images of the white plaster of Paris Statue of Liberty. If anyone goes back to the pictures, you'll see that when the students created this very tall statue, they had 2 of her arms holding up the torch. And the students at the time said, in America, they only need 1 arm to hold up the torch of freedom, but in China, we need 2 arms to support it because there is so little freedom here. Well, as you know, as we moved, into like a very chaotic period, the State Department became more involved. Of course, we were obviously watching events, and we set up what was known as, the Secretary of State, I should say, set up what is known as a task force operation. This grew to a 24/7 group, and it grew to, I believe, at a peak, we had 314 Foreign Service officers on it, which made it the largest task force operating, monitoring the situation since World War II. We really, in 1989, did not know what was going to happen with China. We knew that Luan, or the chaos that the Chinese government feared, was, a potent force. Just like here in America, we talk about people wanting freedom and not wanting to give away the internet or give away, anything to the government beyond what they should have in the way of rights. China was like a new fledgling movement there with the students. So we were monitoring it and watching what was happening. And in those days...
Well, Daria, before you go on, I can remember those times because that was right around the time that Reagan was saying to Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall in Berlin. The Pope was visiting Poland, and there was democracy movements in Poland. This was just a couple of years before the breakup of the Soviet Union. I can remember sitting in my living room, glued to the television, watching what was happening in China, of all places in China, kind of in disbelief that it was happening, kind of in disbelief that the Chinese were letting it happen.
Well, we were all in disbelief, and I was one of the few back in early, I'm not trying to put a feather in my cap or something, but in early 1989, I was really into studying what is driving these people. Why is this thing called freedom so important to them that they would actually challenge a dictatorship, that they would risk their lives, their families' lives, and people did die over this. But it was so strong, it's so innate that people don't want to be confined, no matter what the size of the jail is, be it a nation state or a 10-by-10 cell. They were not going to let this drop. And knowing how the Chinese government operates, that any divisiveness, anyone who doesn't agree with them is a threat. It was a making for a disaster. And I can recall going over to the Chinese embassy and meeting, this is probably late March, early April, and meeting with the director of the political section there and telling him what I thought was going to happen and that I thought it might happen by early June. And months later, after all this occurred, the Chinese embassy wanted to know, what did we do? And I said, we didn't do anything. You can just figure. People can only stand being tied down for so long. And what made the difference, I think, Rick, was that we were starting to see Voice of America going into China. Little bits of the internet were starting to come out in those years. It wasn't that active, but we were just starting to see different technologies come out. In those days, the big one was Voice of America. It was often blocked by the Chinese, but there were ways that the Chinese got the message through. Students could no longer, workers could no longer that joined the movement be told that other nations did not have freedom, that they were all like China. The Chinese, when we talked to them, they didn't know what we had in America. Literally, whether it's dishwashers or fans or air conditioner for every home. It was so unbelievable to them, they couldn't believe it.
Hey, Daria, we're going to have to take a break, but on the other side of the break, I want to pick up this conversation with you. I'd like to know what kind of communications you had in those days. As you said, the web was in its infancy, and our communications in China were, I don't know what we had, but let's pick up this conversation after the break. You are listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader today. We're coming to you live from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, and of course around the world on the internet. By the way, today's show is brought to you by the First Amendment, and it is protected by the Second. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Oh, how I'm longing for the day when I'm back at Orchid Bay, where the silver water glistens in the sun.
When is the last time you raced a small boat across wide open water? Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's ABACO. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
What does it take to be the leader in production systems technology? To be the one company that solves production problems at any plant, for any product, and with any technology? It takes a 30-year record of success. It takes total mastery of complex technologies with a history of delivering success every time, without fail. Only one company can claim that high ground in manufacturing line optimization, data automation, and systems integration, and that's Philadelphia Control Systems. In factories worldwide, Philadelphia Control Systems programs, software, and engineering solutions deliver optimal performance and output flow with a record that can't be matched. Any plant, any product, any technology. Philadelphia Control Systems, the leader in production automation since 1982. 800-335-9811, PCS4automation.com. That's PCS, the number 4, automation.com.
Hi, this is Bob Vide, owner of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glassboro, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Viden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glassboro, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittle.sportshop.com.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader. And program note, if you'd like to hear a rebroadcast of today's show at 10:10 this evening Eastern Time, please log on to patriotsride.org. That's patriotsride.org. And at 5 p.m. when we end our live broadcast, if you'd like to hear yesterday's show once again, you can find that at cprworldwidemedia.com. cprworldwidemedia.com. Could also hear a rebroadcast of today's show tomorrow afternoon at vigilantlibertyradio.us. And don't forget, you can now hear our show anytime, day or night, by calling 832-999-1199. There's no extra charges for this call, but make sure you use a phone that you have unlimited long-distance access to. So, Daria, we were talking about this being the yesterday actually, Wednesday being the 25th anniversary of the massacre at Tiananmen Square. You at that time were working at the State Department, monitoring the activities at that time coming from China. So, Daria, what was that like? How did you do that? How did the government keep track of what was going on in China?
You know, it was a really difficult situation because, as I said, we didn't have the internet going everywhere like we do today. So you have to imagine that our information was very, very limited. I had at one point 314, as I said, I think was our top people working. I was one of the task force leaders there. So we would have to get information in, figure out how to analyze what was going on, and then brief both the Secretary of State, the various other leaders within the military in different parts of our government, our allies, our embassy, figure out what we're doing, and also American companies who had personnel who were there and Americans visiting. So it was a complex situation. Now, imagine this. You have all of this going on. We don't know whether civil war is about to take place because our embassy physically out the windows at one point heard the rumbling of tanks on the outside of the city of Beijing. I think they call it the 38th Army. Is it going to move in or not? Well, we had about approximately 8,600 Americans there, and it's our first responsibility to protect American lives overseas. And we took it seriously, and unfortunately I don't think maybe this administration does, but for us, every American life counts. Now, imagine we have a task force set up inside a computer center. The only way we're able to communicate is by cable traffic, in essence, sending a secure telegram back and forth. You write something up, send it over to the embassy, they read it and have to figure it out. We were having a lot of trouble with communications, satellite phones going up and down, obviously the Chinese government listening into what we're saying, and we're trying to figure out how to handle things. This was literally the solution at one point. In this room where there's a conference room, we have in the corner set a little table with a princess phone on the table. Because our communications were going down so often, the way during the immediate crisis we communicated often was through an open telephone line. So we literally dialed the Beijing embassy, American embassy, I should say, in Beijing on an open international line, and then set the phone handle down beside the phone. So if we needed to, we could still talk to them, under an emergency condition, knowing full well that the Chinese were listening in on the line.
So let me get this straight. We can put men on the moon, but we had to depend on a princess phone to keep the lines of communication open between Washington and our embassy in Beijing.
That was the challenge, to continue to be able to communicate, because we had no real clue as to what really was going on over there at the time. Now, what was funny that happened at one point is the Secretary of State came down. I quickly briefed him on what was going on. And
who was it at that time? Was it Schultz?
James Baker. No, Baker was in.
James Baker.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, we had the Secretary of State on the phone. I told him what was going on. He wanted to talk to Ambassador Lilly directly. So I explained that the princess phone was an open international line, Mr. Secretary. He said, don't worry about it. I'll talk in code so that none of the Chinese know what's going on. So we got Ambassador Lilly on the phone with him, and the Secretary of State's first words out of his mouth is, how is the number one leader in China doing? Now, that's not too much code. You can figure out he's talking about Deng Xiaoping at that point.
Yeah.
But all of us in the room were just looking like, oh, this is not going to go very well, but none of us were willing to tell the Secretary of State, this is not too wise to do on an international line.
Right.
But we were really stressed out, not knowing whether we were going to be able to rescue people if we did have to bring Americans out.
Because at that time there were thousands of Americans there, right?
We had about 8,600 Americans, I think, that were there. But we also had agreements. You know, we would obviously help the Aussies and the Brits and different allies of ours. They had people there, too.
Right.
There were problems because there wasn't gasoline available. How do you collect all the people from the various hotels that are there for traveling for business, for vacation, for different reasons? At one point, and I think that's definitely been released now, we had people at the embassy talking to the Chinese government. And
were you sworn to secrecy?
Oh, of course, we had top secret clearances.
Right.
I'm not saying anything that hasn't been released, believe me.
Yeah, okay. So Daria...
Don't trouble you all this time later.
Right.
No, but it was really interesting because a lot of the Chinese government did not want to have a problem. They wanted this settled peacefully. They weren't in favor of going in and hurting the students.
But in the end, they sent in the tanks and upwards of 10,000 died?
Can you say again? The phone was a little bit hard.
Okay, in the end, from what I can recall and from what I've heard, that the Chinese government, the Chinese army, did send in to Tiananmen Square the tanks, and that 10,000 were slaughtered.
The numbers range from 300 on the very low end to several thousand, and they'll never know the true numbers of what happened. But even the Chinese military were not very happy about things. They actually went around the city of Beijing putting out 55-gallon drums of gasoline and letting the American embassy know where they were located so we could fill our cars so we could go around to pick up Americans at the various hotels because you couldn't get gas otherwise.
Right.
They were trying in many ways to cooperate. Not all of the Chinese government wanted this to go down the way that it did.
Hey, Daria, I hate to rush the story. I wish we had more time because this is really interesting stuff. We only have about a minute and a half before we have to go to our break, and then we have our first guest on. So what has changed, or what changed after the Tiananmen Square massacre?
I think the biggest change was that we had the internet so information could flow freely. When you have the free flow of information, as the Soviets in those days would say, you can't have a free printing press and be communist. It just won't happen. You have to stop the free press. When we had open communications and the Chinese came here as students, when they had American businessmen going there, when the truth came out, the Chinese government had to change. They had to modernize in order to be strong. As long as you have freedom, you can't have communism.
For Daria, very interesting talking with you, very interesting knowing you and that you were there and that you were so involved in monitoring everything going on. Just a brief moment here. I want to say we're going to take a break in about 1 minute. On the other side, we're going to be speaking with Jed Babin. He's a former Air Force officer who served as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense in the George H.W. Bush administration. He's also a best-selling author, but he's going to be joining us here on the Conservative Commandos radio show to talk about an article that he co-wrote with Herb London, Palestinian Boycott Movement Bites the Hand That Feeds It. And so we got Jeb as a guest. We're also going to have Dr. Michael Brown join us today, and Dr. Brown has written an article about the latest mass killing in California and how that may have been triggered by video games. We're also going to be speaking with Peter Roth, who's a contributing editor at U.S. News and World Report, and he's going to be joining us to talk about the House is trying to block an Obama plan to cede control of the Internet. With that, Daria, we are going to take a break. You're listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader coming to you live from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, and, of course, around the world on the Internet via our Internet broadcast partners, CPRWorldwideMedia.com, PatriotsRide.org, and VigilantLibertyRadio.us. And don't forget, check out our websites, conservativecommandosradioshow.com and ccrshow.com. Don't go away. Derry and I will be right back with our very first guest today, Jed Babin.
What does it take to be the leader in production systems technology? To be the one company that solves production problems at any plant, for any product, and with any technology? It takes a 30-year record of success. It takes total mastery of complex technologies with a history of delivering success every time, without fail. Only one company can claim that high ground in manufacturing line optimization, data automation, and systems integration, and that's Philadelphia Control Systems. In factories worldwide, Philadelphia Control Systems programs, software, and engineering solutions deliver optimal performance and output flow with a record that can't be matched. Any plant, any product, any technology. Philadelphia Control Systems, the leader in production automation since 1982. 800-335-9811, PCS4automation.com. That's PCS, the number 4, automation.com.
Oh, how I'm longing for the day when I'm back at Orchid Bay, where the silver water glistens in the sun.
When is the last time you raced a small boat across wide open water? Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's ABACO. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the Sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
Hi, this is Bob Vide, owner of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Viden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittle.sportshop.com.
The Obama attack on our Constitution continues. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com and join J.D. Benier and Christina Lamb and hundreds of Reagan conservative commandos who demand our country return to its founding documents and principles. We are part of the nation's oldest and largest GOP volunteer organization, the National Federation of Republican Assemblies. We register voters, endorse conservative candidates, and dig deep to give you the truth on the big issues. We are fighting to do what Lincoln proclaimed 150 years ago. Let the people know the facts and the nation will be free. Help support the Conservative Commando Radio Show with your donation today. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com. INRASuperPAC.com.
Now hear this. Man your battle stations.
You can call the Conservative Commandos Radio Show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
And welcome back to the Conservative Commandos Radio Show with Daria Novak and yours truly, Rick Trader. coming to you live from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, the way we do Monday through Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern, and of course around the world on the internet. And Daria Novak, we do have our very first guest of the day joining us, and the honor of the introduction is yours, so please take it away.
And it is. We have today with us Jed Babin, who's a former Air Force officer who served as a Deputy Undersecretary of Defense in the George H.W. Bush administration. He's a best-selling author of In the Words of Our Enemies, Inside the Asylum, Why the UN and Old Europe Are Worse Than You Think, and Showdown, Why China Wants War with the United States, that came out in 2006. And I believe he also has some newer works that he'll be talking about. Now, Mr. Babin has served as editor of Human Events, the oldest conservative journal in the entire United States. And today he writes columns for the American Spectator and contributes to the Washington Examiner, Weekly Standard, and National Review Online. Mr. Babin's also guest hosted for some of my favorites, including Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Michael Savage, Laura Ingraham, and Michael Reagan, and began his guest host appearances on Oliver North's Common Sense Radio in 1999. Jed, welcome to the Conservative Commandos radio show.
Well, thanks. I'm grateful for you both for having me.
This is quite an impressive resume that you have. Before we actually get going, I have to tell you that my son is at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and plans to enter the Air Force. So I have to admit that right now that's my favorite branch of the military, and I wanted to say thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
I was reading some of the background of your column that you have recently done with Dr. Herb London at townhall.com. It's entitled The Palestinian Boycott, Divest and Sanctions, or BDS, movement is so hell-bent on the destruction of Israel it's willing to bite the hand that feeds it. Can you tell us a little bit about what BDS is, so before we get into the conversation, our listeners know what this organization is about?
Sure. The BDS movement is a global movement. It's funded by a number of European countries, including Sweden, the Netherlands, and others. And their aim is to basically make Israel a pariah nation. What they want to do is convince people that it is an evil nation, about like North Korea or Iran, and for that reason should be shunned by the rest of the international community. It's all basically a pack of lies. And as I write in our new book, Herb London and I, the BDS War Against Israel, the BDS movement is entirely based on lies. They're accusing Israel of being a racist country, an apartheid country. They're accusing it of war crimes and a whole variety of other things, which basically are, frankly, a pack of lies. And we document that in the book. So I urge people to take a look at the book simply to understand what this movement is about. It's, as I said, an international movement, and what they're trying to do is get a lot of support, and they are getting a lot of support from the non-governmental organization community, and a lot of funding from there. A lot of Palestinian NGOs, European NGOs, a lot of, not companies, but NGOs that you would think of as charities are all participating in the BDS movement. So it's a very concerted ideological attack against Israel, and quite frankly, I think our book is the first effort to really answer all of those lies and take them to task.
I don't think I've seen anything else out on BDS. I think you're correct. I usually ask at the very end, but can you tell our listeners, in case they want to grab a pencil and write this down, the exact title of the book and where they can get it?
Sure. It's called The BDS War Against Israel, and you can get it on Amazon today.
And that's something I know that I'm going to want to read, too. Now, with the BDS movement, there's some big-name supporters of it in the past, including George Soros, that we all know the name of that particular leftist. Can you tell us what his involvement was in the BDS movement and where it is today?
Yeah, Soros has supported them financially and extensively. For example, I believe he gave $1 million gift to one of the big NGOs that is supporting the BDS movement. He is giving grants to students in the United States to go to college and graduate school, and those people are avowed supporters of BDS, and he's really been giving them an awful lot of support, as you would expect from someone such as himself. He's quite anti-Israel and against anything that has to do with the businesses in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, particularly the West Bank, where Israel has had some success and frankly is employing an awful lot of Palestinians who would otherwise be out of work. So that's the aim of Soros and company, is to shut off those businesses, to blockade them, to boycott them, and to make sure the rest of the world does. Right now, the interesting part is, as we write in our piece in Town Hall, the real issue is that George Soros apparently did something. He invested in a couple of companies. One is Teva Pharmaceuticals, and there's a couple of others in the West Bank. So the BDS movement, of course, is trying to boycott him now. But in fact, they're not really going to do it. The BDS movement can't afford to lose the financial support, so they're making a big huff and puff noise about all of this. And they're saying, well, we're going to boycott Soros's funds and his network of charities and grant groups, but it's not going to happen. They can't afford to give up that financial support, and in fact, they won't.
So in addition to George Soros and his reasons, did this BDS movement form? Are these radicals? Are they terrorists involved in this? Or is it just that they have a radicalized agenda?
Well, it's a radical agenda. It came out of the so-called UN Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa back in 2001. And they had a group of about 1,250 of these non-governmental organizations, a lot of them European, some of them American, and they adopted, well, really, the 2001 conference was basically a fun fest of anti-American and anti-Israeli propaganda, and they came out with an agenda of about 250 points, which basically says Israel is all of the things that we've just talked about, and the BDS movement came directly out of that. And when you look at the NGOs, you look at, it's almost like the kind of thing you see amongst the American media. And we have a very good quote from Brent Bozell in the book talking about that. The basic point here is it's a culture. It's not a conspiracy. There's an anti-Israeli culture amongst these NGOs and all through Europe, and I'm sure there are other places that are supporting them, but they're trying to get a foothold now in the United States. They've done some work here. There's a network of chapters of the BDS movement all around the country. I think there's, 2 or 3 dozen of them at this point in colleges and other places. So what they're trying to do, again, is to limit Israel and limit its access to the international community, to paint it as a pariah when it doesn't deserve to be. I mean, Israel is not a rogue nation. It's not governed by terrorists. There are some terrorist groups tangentially involved in the BDS movement, but it's really more these Palestinian and European NGOs, and they live under, the NGO Monitor, which has done an awful lot of very good work about this. They call it the halo effect. An awful lot of these NGOs, they pronounce themselves to be supportive of, freedom and dignity and human rights and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when all of that is, it sounds like these guys are the little sisters of the poor, but they're not. They're multi-million-dollar organizations, many, many, many of them, and they're completely radical and anti-Israeli. And there's nobody sticking up for the Israelis right now, and as you said, this is the first book that really tries to take them on. So we're trying to just simply tell the truth. There are hundreds of footnotes in this book to demonstrate that what we are saying is absolutely true. So that's the nub of it.
I hate to cut you off, but we've got to go to a commercial break, Jed, and I would love it if you would stay with us and come right back and we could pick up this discussion after the break.
Be glad to.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to take a break right now. You're listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader, and we're coming to you from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360 in Philadelphia, and of course around the world on the internet via our internet broadcast partners, CPRWorldwideMedia.com, PatriotsRide.org, and VigilantLibertyRadio.us. And don't forget, check out our websites, ConservativeCommandosRadioshow.com and CCRShow.com. Please don't go away. On the other side, Daria and I are going to continue our interview with Jed Babbitt.
Yeah, that's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I... Oh, how I'm longing for the day when I'm back at Orchid Bay, where the silver water glistens in the sun.
When is the last time you raced a small boat across wide open water? Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's A-B-A-C-O. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
Hi, this is Bob Vide, owner of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glassboro, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Viden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glassboro, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittle.sportshop.com.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos Radio Show with Darian Novak and yours truly, Rick Trader. And if you'd like to hear a rebroadcast of today's show at 10:10 this evening, log on to patriotsride.org. And at 5 p.m. when we end our live broadcast, if you'd like to hear yesterday's show once again, place for that is at cprworldwidemedia.com. And don't forget, you can hear our show anytime, day or night, just by calling 832-999-1199. And our guest this segment is Jed Babin. He's a former U.S. Air Force officer, and he's also a senior fellow at the London Center. And along with Dr. Herb London, who is the president of the London Center, they're the co-authors of a new book, The BDS War on Israel. Jed, thanks for holding through the break. We appreciate your time, and you appreciate you staying with us.
My pleasure.
And by the way, you can read an excerpt from the new book that Jed and Dr. Herb London has out at the Washington Examiner today. Jed, let me ask you this, and it's probably not going to be a question you could answer because that means looking into the mind of George Soros that I don't know that anybody can do, but what is his hate and disdain for Israel?
I don't know. And it's really a good question because no one can look into his mind. But, Soros gravitates to everything having to do with, against conservative principles and against America's basic founding principles. And this is one of the things that he's gravitated toward. I mean, the BDS movement is trying to damage the only democracy in the Middle East, the only ally we really have there. So obviously, his general anti-American bent is going to flow out to Israel, and he's a billionaire, so he can support these organizations with a whole variety of different funding and grants and whatnot. So that's, I would guess, just his normal tendency.
Jed, it seems to me it's a bit hypocritical because, after all, as you mentioned in your column, that he does have investments in SodaStream and Treva Pharmaceuticals, and, go figure.
Well, I mean, those investments are simply good business.
Yeah.
I mean, those companies are doing well, and they're doing things quite frankly, as I mentioned earlier, to employ Palestinians who would not otherwise be employed. So I don't know why he would not invest in them. But the BDS movement, obviously, their whole stated reason for being is to get the Israelis out of their investments, out of the West Bank altogether. And frankly, what they want to do is engage this so-called right of return. And by doing so, by returning 4.7 million Palestinians from other countries to Israel, most of whom would not be returning anyway, because they're second and third generation of the people who left Israel, the Israeli area, when the 1947-49 war took place. But this is basically what they want to do. They want to make Israel into an Islamic state by injecting, well, frankly, 4.7 million people, very few of whom were actually born there.
It's really interesting because you talk about having, in your article, about having spoken with the senior European Union official, Leonello Gabrici, and you have a quote in the article. It says, "We are not working on boycotting Israel, but rather on preparing an unprecedented package of EU value for peace." Why do you think the European nations think that hurting Israel is going to create peace?
Well, that's the cultural bubble that they're in. I didn't speak to Gabrici. I quote him in the book from other news reports. But the basic point here is they don't understand, or they can't imagine, or their cultural values say that supporting Israel would not be value added for peace, which is completely backwards. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. These people are trying to engineer a cultural boycott against Israel, for one thing. And, you got to love the Rolling Stones. I mean, I'm now a fan of theirs because they decided to play in Israel despite pressure from lefties in the music business like Pink Floyd. You look at all the things going on, and you see now the European Union just announced today that they are planning on a new whole set of sanctions against Israel because Israel is building more settlements and frankly building more housing in the West Bank, which they're entitled to do. So these people are just terrifically anti-Israel. You see the same thing in the Obama administration. You see an awful lot of people, well, principally the president and Secretary of State John Kerry, who are really trying to adopt, they don't dare adopt it outright, but they're basically tending towards what the BDS movement wants to do. Kerry keeps talking about, well, Israel risks being an apartheid state if the peace plan that he was advocating doesn't go forward. Well, that's nonsense. You see that...
Well, here would be my question to you. When I was young and growing up, everybody was talking about we're pro-Israel, it's a democracy, we need to support them, freedom, people's rights, things like that. Today, the American Jews in this nation seem like they're either ignoring the problems, or some of them, and financially not supporting Israel, or some of them are even talking against Israel. When I was young, I'm 57, there used to be more of a Zionist movement. What's happened? Why aren't American Jews supporting that Israel, do you think?
Well, I wish I knew. I think the American Jewish community is frankly tied so closely to the Democratic Party that the Democrats can do pretty much anything, and the Jewish community at large is still going to support them. And I'm Jewish. I'm certainly not supporting anything that the Obama administration is doing. I'm trying to support Israel with this book by simply telling the truth. And there's nothing else to it. You look at what the BDS movement is doing, you look at what the people in the Democratic Party are doing, principally the White House and Secretary Kerry. I mean, they are terribly, terribly anti-Israel. I only wish I knew why the Jewish community was not more critical of them.
It just doesn't seem to make it, you start to think about politics in terms of something that's logical. I realize there are more Muslims in Europe right now, that's a growing issue and problem. But you would start to think, with everything that Europe has been through, world wars and everything else, that they would say that here is another democracy that actually is the only one, I believe, in the Middle East that allows people of all religions to have rights and practice their religion. Am I correct on that they do allow that in Israel, but not in other areas in the Middle East?
Well, not in other areas of the Middle East, but certainly in Israel. I mean, the BDS movement keeps saying Israel is an apartheid state. Well, let me just say that under apartheid, for example, blacks in South Africa pre-1989 couldn't vote. In Israel, the people who are, Palestinians/Arabs can vote. Arab women can vote, and that's not allowed in most Middle Eastern nations. And you see that, frankly, I think there's 120 members of the Israeli parliament. I think 10 or 12 of them are elected by the Arab citizens, and they represent the Arabs. So, this is completely a democracy. The charges against Israel are entirely false, and it needs to be broadcast to the world. I mean, people need to understand what is going on here.
Jed, speaking about how the Palestinians can vote in Israel, I was in Israel a couple of years ago, and what was a surprise to me is when our tour guide, who was Israeli, talked about one of the things that was facing Israel was that many Israelis were afraid that the time was coming within the next 10 years that Israel would cease to exist as a Jewish state because the Palestinians will outvote the Israelis.
Well, that's a possibility. I mean, the Arab citizens of Israel are entitled to vote, and, they're going to have kids, and their population may grow to a very large extent. I mean, who knows? But I think the more obvious and imminent danger is this so-called right of return, which frankly does not exist under international law. So the Palestinians, the activists, the people who are behind this BDS movement, want to create a false right of return and have Israel become an Islamic state overnight.
Well, I know we only have about 3 minutes, but I really would love to know, have you or any of your friends talked to people in the U.S. Congress about why they are not more strongly supporting Israel as an ally, as a democracy, and fighting these types of movements?
Well, I have talked to a couple of people up there, and I think there's some interest in that, but I don't think that there's going to be any action taken for quite some time, if at all. The Congress at this point is really, it has made itself irrelevant because it has not stood up to the president for so many of the things that he's done. And frankly, I don't know what Congress could do that would actually be of any value.
Now, if our listeners would like to read your book, could you tell us both where, again, they could get your book, the title, and also a website where they could follow your work?
Sure, and thank you for that. The book is entitled The BDS War Against Israel, and you can go on Amazon and get it today. You can follow me on American Spectator, which is www.spectator.org, or the Washington Examiner, which is www.washingtonexaminer.com.
And then finally, if they want to read the article that you just wrote on this subject, could you tell people where they can go to read the article?
Sure. That's on www.townhall.com, and look up my article co-authored with Dr. Herbert London.
Thank you. Rick?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Jeb, for joining us today on the Conservative Commandos radio show. Jeb Babin from the London Institute. And right after this break, we're going to take a break in about 2 minutes. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Michael Brown. He's the host of the nationally syndicated Line of Fire radio broadcast and the president of the Fire School of Ministry, and he's a professor of the Bible and Hebrew studies at several leading seminaries. Dr. Brown wrote an article last week, and I talked about it a little bit here on the Conservative Commandos radio show after Elliot Rodger, the young man in California that killed the 6 people out there. And at the time, what I said kind of off the cuff was, I wonder when they look at this young man and his background, if they're going to find out that he was a video game player. And sure enough, there it was, that he was a video game devotee. And Dr. Brown wrote an article that we're going to be talking with him, with Dr. Brown, Violent Video Games and Mass Murder. So we're going to take a break right now. You're listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader, coming to you live from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, our flagship station, and around the world on the internet. And Don't forget, you can now hear our show anytime, day or night by calling 832-999-1199. Call using your cell phone. Use up those mobile minutes. There's no extra charge for this call, so call from a phone that you do have unlimited access. Don't go away. Darian and I will be right back.
They say I'm crazy. I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I...
What does it take to be the leader in production systems technology? To be the one company that solves production problems at any plant, for any product, and with any technology? It takes a 30-year record of success. It takes total mastery of complex technologies with a history of delivering success every time, without fail. Only one company can claim that high ground in manufacturing line optimization, data automation, and systems integration, and that's Philadelphia Control Systems. In factories worldwide, Philadelphia Control Systems programs, software, and engineering solutions deliver optimal performance and output flow with a record that can't be matched. Any plant, any product, any technology. Philadelphia Control Systems, the leader in production automation since 1982. 800-335-9811, PCS4automation.com. That's PCS, the number 4, automation.com.
Oh, how I'm longing for the day when I'm back at Orchid Bay, where the silver water glistens in the sun.
When is the last time you raced a small boat across wide open water? Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's ABACO. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
Hi, this is Bob Vide, owner of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Viden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittlesportshop.com.
The Obama attack on our Constitution continues. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com and join J.D. Beneer and Christina Lamb and hundreds of Reagan conservative commandos who demand our country return to its founding documents and principles. We are part of the nation's oldest and largest GOP volunteer organization, the National Federation of Republican Assemblies. We register voters, endorse conservative candidates, and dig deep to give you the truth on the big issues. We are fighting to do what Lincoln proclaimed 150 years ago. Let the people know the facts and the nation will be free. Help support the Conservative Commando Radio Show with your donation today. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com. INRASuperPAC.com.
Now hear this. Man your battle stations.
You can call the Conservative Commandos Radio Show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader, coming to you from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, and of course around the world on the internet via our internet broadcast partners, CPRWorldwideMedia.com, PatriotsRide.org, VigilantLibertyRadio.us, and don't forget you can now hear our show anytime, day or night by calling 832-999-1199. There's no extra charges for this call, but be sure you call from a phone that you have unlimited long-distance access to. And our next guest is Dr. Michael Brown. He is the host of the nationally syndicated Line of Fire radio broadcast, the president of Fire School of Ministry, and a professor of Bible and Hebrew studies at several leading seminaries. Dr. Brown has debated Jewish rabbis, agnostic professors, and gay activists on radio, TV, and college campuses, and he is widely considered to be the world's foremost Masonic Jewish apologist. Dr. Brown, welcome to the Conservative Commandos radio show.
Hey, great to be on the air with you. Yeah, and that's actually Messianic. Some people say Masonic. I just want folks to know I'm not part of the Masonic Lodge, just to be clear.
Messianic, thank you. Dr. Brown, we ask you to join us today to discuss an article that you wrote that really caught my attention last week, right after the Elliot Rodger killings out in California. Doctor, one of the very first things I said to our audience here is, I bet when they investigate this guy's background, they're going to find violent video games in it. And Dr. Brown, Elliot Rodger is just the latest of many perpetrators of mass murder who seems to be affected and influenced by violent video games. And in fact, you begin your article by saying, and I quote, Elliot Rodger quoted the character Garrosh Hellscream of World of Warcraft in his final YouTube video. The few times that I have written an article about the possible connection between violent video acts and violent video games, I immediately receive responses from readers who say, quote, I've played violent video games for years and they have not affected me negatively. I'm perfectly capable of distinguishing between fantasy and reality. Dr. Brown, how do you respond to people who respond to you that way? Dr. Brown? Dr. Brown, are you with us? Okay, and apparently we lost our connection with Dr. Brown. Brett, could you see if you could get Dr. Brown back on the line? Daria, are you with me?
Yeah, I am. You know what? I was going to ask Dr. Brown a question that I will when we get back. But, you know, I'm actually reading a really interesting book along this lines. Is he back now? Or
no, we're trying to remake the connection.
Okay, well, it's a really interesting book called You Are the Placebo, Making Your Mind Matter. Mm-hmm. And I just want to give like a one-sentence quote. Sure. It talks about how you can actually change your brain patterns by thinking about things, and it changes the biology of the brain through your environment and things. And it says that new experience will reorganize the old programming, and in doing so, it will remove the neurological evidence of that past experience. Mm. And what the book talks about is that the things that you do in your life, whether it's through peace and meditation or through violence, actually rewire the brain so that becomes how you operate. In other words, it's like taking a computer and not only changing the software, but changing the operating system of the computer.
Okay,
so
Daria, we do
like the activities.
Right, Daria, we do have our guest back. Dr. Brown, are you back with us? Dr. Brown,
sorry about that. Yeah, the thing that's interesting to me is just because you have a lot of people who play these games, which are mega violent, and often reward sadism and reward the more violent acts, and then they can also be sexually degrading towards women and filled with profanity. You know, it's not what you call wholesome entertainment on any score.
Right.
But the fact that people can play these games and don't go out and kill people, I understand that. We're talking about people who are unstable. We're talking about people who have a hard time distinguishing between reality and fantasy. And for sure, if you play this day and night, you are going to be desensitized. I don't see how anyone could deny that if you immerse yourself in this, and heavy players will play by the hour and sometimes become antisocial because they're so immersed in these games. Studies debate this, but more and more studies are saying yes, people that immerse themselves in watching violent TV, violent movies, play violent video games, they are going to have a greater tendency to aggressive behavior. And those who are unstable, this is going to provide fodder for all types of bizarre fantasies. And I ask a simple question in my article, which is, what would have happened to Elliot Rodger? He seemed to have other issues and other problems through his life. But if he had immersed himself in wholesome entertainment over the years, would he have ended up doing the same things he did? I think it's a fair question to ask.
I think it is a fair question to ask, and I think it's a very legitimate question to ask because, you know, in your article, you write here that Rodger alone is responsible for his actions, and none of us have the authority to play armchair psychologists. And you write, but we can and should look at larger issues involved and ask if perhaps there is a connection between violent video games and murder. And Dr. Brown, true, Elliot Rodgers acted alone and is responsible for his actions, but I also believe that there are others that may also add to a certain degree to that responsibility. For instance, his parents. You know, do you believe that parents are responsible in determining, judging, and monitoring and filtering what their children do and watch and how they act?
Yeah, certainly. If we just address that broader question, do parents know what their 8-year-old is doing on the internet, or what their 10-year-old is playing, or what their 12 or 15-year-old is getting into? They ought to. That's why they're the parents. When we were raising our daughters, we had standards that we lived by, and we were loving parents, but we were strict parents. And when our daughters were teenagers, I asked them to make up a list of everything they would do differently if they were parents. Mm-hmm. Everything that they would do differently than we were doing. And I said, I want you to save the list for when you guys are parents, when you grow up. So we laugh about it today because they're 36 and 35, each with their own kids now. But their list was, no rules, no requirements, no curfew, no this, no that. Well, that's why the kids are kids and the parents are parents. And there's stuff available today that has not been available in human history. There is stuff available that is so powerful, that is so toxic, that is so seductive, so hypnotizing. Studies are now indicating, for example, that people who watch a lot of pornography, it rewires the brain in certain ways. Your caller was mentioning something before. There's a lot of brain plasticity, that the brain can be reprogrammed and rewired and shaped based on activities, especially those that are super repetitive. So as parents, we have a moral responsibility to know what our kids are watching, to know what our kids are downloading on the internet. To the average age of first exposure to pornography today is somewhere around 11 years old, I've read. So the same with the video games. Do parents really know what's being played? They're a whole lot different than the games that I played when I was a younger person. That they're just coming into existence. Mm-hmm. They're a whole lot different today than they were back then. Does your average parent know what goes on, say, in Grand Theft Auto 5? Probably not. If they did, would they be pleased? Probably not.
Dr. Brown, my father died when I was very young, so I was raised in a single-parent household. There are things that I did when I was a kid that my mother never knew about. Thank God I never got in trouble as a kid. I very well could have. But my mother warned me about the things that I was doing. But Dr. Brown, at the time, I thought I was smarter than my mother. And today what I see is every time you turn on the television, the mass media is pushing the idea on kids that they are smarter than their parents.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think, I'm 59 years old now. I got caught up in the whole counterculture revolution of the 60s. I became a heavy drug user from the ages of 14 to 16 before becoming a born-again follower of Jesus at the age of 16. But even at that time, even at that volatile cultural time, what I grew up watching as a younger kid was stuff like Leave It to Beaver, and Father Knows Best, and Ozzie and Harriet. And you watch those shows today, and it seems like someone was making this stuff up. When I watched that as a kid, I didn't watch that and think to myself, this is so corny and so cheesy. There's not a family in the world like this. We just watched it as a normal show. There was the perception that fathers knew best. There was the perception that mothers had wisdom. For many years now, the sitcoms vilify the parents. The kids can talk to the parents in the harshest of terms, and the parents are just useful idiots in the plot. It's no wonder that there's so little respect for authority. And I would say with it that many times the parents have dropped the ball, and that we haven't been diligent enough as parents to really walk in wisdom, to set good, wholesome examples. So many kids grow up today in completely broken homes where they don't even know what it's like to have a mom and dad together. So it's not a surprise that we have as much moral degeneration as we do in our culture.
Dr. Brown, in your article, you talk about other mass shootings and other violence motivated by video games. Dr. Brown, after the shooting in Connecticut, and we found out that the perpetrator of that horrific crime at Sandy Hook was a young man who lived in his mother's basement, who watched violent video games for 12 hours at a time. Can you please talk about the new phenomena called the knockout game, and how that can also be contributed to violent video games? And can you please talk about violent video games being a factor in things like the Colorado shooting, the Connecticut shooting, and the knockout games?
Yeah, certainly. And folks haven't read the article. If they go to my website, Ask Dr. Brown, it's askdrbrown.org, and click on latest article, they'll find it just a few down as they scroll down. Again, each individual is responsible for what they do. The question is, does certain entertainment, does immersion in certain entertainment sensitize people? Does it help blur the line between reality and fantasy? Does it help someone who is already unstable cross a dangerous line? So let's go back to Columbine. The murderers there, the teenage murderers who then killed themselves. What we do know is that they immersed themselves in movies like Natural Born Killers, which is just full of absolutely gratuitous violence. A movie like that, say in the 50s, would have been completely unimaginable. There was even a code that ruled Hollywood for decades.
Hey, Dr. Brown, I'm sorry. I was so engrossed in our conversation, I forgot the clock. We have to take a break. Could you hold on for just 2 minutes for a real quick break? All right, you are listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Rick Trader and Daria Novak, coming to you live from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, and around the world on the internet. Please don't go away. We're speaking with Dr. Michael Brown. He is the host of the nationally syndicated radio show Line of Fire, and we're talking with Dr. Brown, an article that he wrote that's up on his website, Violent Video Games and Mass Murder. Please don't go away. Daria and I will be right back with our guest.
I'm crazy. I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I... Oh, how I'm longing for the day when I'm back at Orchid Bay, where the silver water glistens in the sun.
When is the last time you raced a small boat across wide open water? Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's ABACO. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
Hi, this is Bob Vide, owner of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Biden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittle.sportshop.com.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos Radio Show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader. And by the way, you can hear a rebroadcast of today's show at 10:10 this evening by logging on to patriotsride.org. That's patriotsride.org. And at 5 p.m. when we end our live broadcast, if you'd like to hear a repeat of yesterday's show, log on to cprworldwidemedia.com. And we're talking with Dr. Michael Brown. He's the host of the nationally syndicated Line of Fire radio show. He's also the president of the Fire School of Ministry. Dr. Brown is the author of numerous scholarly and popular articles, also many books included You Can Be Gay and Christian, Responding with Love and Truth to Questions About Homosexuality. Dr. Brown, thanks for holding through the break. We do appreciate your time, sir.
Sure thing. Yeah, and by the way, I think you reworded the title of my book slightly. It actually
I didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I was smiling as you did. Can you be gay and Christian? It's actually asking a question rather than making a statement. But, yeah, so right before the break, what I was saying was the idea that immersion in these hyper-violent, gratuitously violent video games, and it's not even a matter of getting the bad guys. Sometimes you're rewarded for getting the good guys. Sometimes there is no morality in it. So you take someone who may be unstable, you take someone who now immerses themselves, say the Columbine killers, whatever antisocial behavior they had, whatever failings there were with the parents not knowing they're building bombs in their own garages, let's put those things aside. They immerse themselves in movies like Natural Born Killers filled with gratuitous violence. In the past, Hollywood had a code many years ago where violent criminality could not be rewarded, where the bad guy had to be punished, etc., and where law and order were good things. So this stands it really on its head in many ways. And then they immerse themselves in video games like Doom and Mortal Kombat. That's the only reason I can see how they could go after being immersed in this fantasy world of horrific violence for hour after hour for several years, then go into their school and begin shooting their classmates and laughing as they're doing it. Mm-hmm. I talked to a Special Forces soldier who told me that it was traumatic the first time he killed someone in battle and realized he had just taken a life. I've read the stories of terrorists in prison who were European terrorists in different political terrorist groups years ago, and they talked about how their dream was shattered the first time they killed someone because it was so traumatic, and then their heart got harder. Here you've got these kids laughing as they're killing their classmates. How do you get to that point, that demented? Could it be the immersion in fantasy violence for a period of time, and you have someone who's unstable, apparently as Adam Lanza was, the Newtown killer? How do you go and kill little children in cold blood? Could it be part of the desensitizing process is added to by way of these violent video games? It seems self-evident to me. Again, everyone's responsible for their actions, and it's not to say that there aren't other circumstances, but this has to tip the scale for some to do the things that they do.
Dr. Brown, I think it also goes beyond video games. And in fact, you alluded to it in your column. You write that television, even violence in the news, have been found to have a similar impact, as if that would somehow minimize rather than highlight the potentiality or the potentially negative effects of these games. Dr. Brown, I think you can also add in there that movies and music, violent movies and music, whenever these tragedies and shootings occur, though, liberal politicians, the mass media, and Hollywood are always out there to only blame guns. And the idea that Hollywood, the media and liberals are the perpetrators and the creators of violent video games, music, television, they're the first ones to go on the defensive. Do you agree?
That seems highly hypocritical to me. The gun control debate is a separate issue. Many would point out that these killers target places where there's strict gun control laws so that they know that they're not going to be taken out quickly in terms of what they're doing, and if in a place where more people were carrying, these things wouldn't happen. That's a separate debate. But it's absolutely the height of hypocrisy when someone involved in ultra-violent videos or video production or ultra-violent movies, and then you mentioned some of the music. Well, certainly, say, some of the hip-hop and rap culture is very degrading towards women and speaks of them in sexually degrading ways and just paints them as sex objects, and then that's how the music videos are. Does that contribute to a culture of violence towards women? Does that contribute to a culture where women are more readily raped? That's a fair question to ask.
Very fair question.
It's the height of hypocrisy to be involved in making these movies, and the movies portray all the gratuitous violence, and then someone actually acts the thing out, and now you talk about gun control. How about talking about the larger issues as well?
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Brown, sorry to interrupt, but we only have a few minutes left with you, and my co-host, Daria Novak, has a question. She wants to get into the conversation. Daria?
You know, Dr. Brown, I've been listening to you on this, and I have a 17-year-old who's a sophomore in college and a 16-year-old who's a senior in high school. And they are bombarded with these images. Now, we put at our house a very strong emphasis on morality, and we do the right things here. When I talk to my kids, and I'm sure this is many of our listeners the same way, they say to me, even though they'll agree with me, but they'll say, well, everyone else says, and that's the line that you get, everything goes, it's all okay, don't be judgmental. The world as we know it's changed from your generation. And the things that these kids are presented with are very realistic, as you mentioned, not fantasy like when we were young. I'm 57, so I grew up with I Love Lucy and, Father Knows Best and all that. Now, I've been reading a lot of books on this subject lately, and so one of the books in particular I read by Dr. Joe Dispenza called You Are the Placebo talks about the fact that these images are, as you mentioned, the elasticity in the brain, these images are so violent and realistic that it physically changes the chemistry. If our listeners wanted to help get their children away from this stuff, I know in a sense it's almost reprogramming, but how do you change these kids' perception of violence? Because they'll say I Love Lucy is a boring, flat show. It's not real.
And Dr. Brown, I got to ask you to answer that question in a minute. We're coming up against, and I know you got to catch a plane too. So,
yeah, you got it. Number one, it's a great challenge, but it can be overcome. What we have to do is get involved with our kids and find activities that they like, find things that they enjoy doing, be it sports, be it some hobby. There may be an investment of time that's necessary, but get them involved in other stuff where they can enjoy doing things. Maybe even bring them on a project where they help somebody in need, and suddenly they think, wow, this is neat. And then also show them, hey, there are consequences. You know how many of kids your age kill themselves? They didn't do that so much in my day. You know how many mass murders there are? They didn't do that so much in my day. 1 out of 4 teenage girls has a sexually transmitted disease. That wasn't happening in my day. It's not all without consequence. If you can see that there's a real-life negative consequence, perhaps they can wake up to the reality of it. Show them, hey, here it is on the video game. Here's the kid bloody dying in the hallway, is there a connection? But whatever we take away, we got to replace with something else that's better. Obviously, from a spiritual viewpoint, coming to know God, being in the Scriptures, that's the greatest transformation of all, and the biggest thing to fill our lives with. But
Dr. Michael Brown, we got to go. We're up against a break. Please give out a website where people can follow you, your work, and your writings.
Yes, sir. Ask Dr. Brown, askdrbrown.org. Thousands of hours of free resources there.
I wish we had more time because I got a bunch more questions. Really appreciate your article. I saw it on GOP USA, so it's getting around on different websites.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Take care. God bless. We're going to take a break right now. You're listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader, coming to you from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philly, and around the world on the internet via CPRWorldwideMedia.com, PatriotsRide.org, VigilantLibertyRadio.us, and don't forget you can now hear our show anytime, day or night, by calling 832-999-1199. Be right back.
What does it take to be the leader in production systems technology? To be the one company that solves production problems at any plant, for any product, and with any technology? It takes a 30-year record of success. It takes total mastery of complex technologies with a history of delivering success every time, without fail. Only one company can claim that high ground in manufacturing line optimization, data automation, and systems integration, and that's Philadelphia Control Systems. In factories worldwide, Philadelphia Control Systems programs, software, and engineering solutions deliver optimal performance and output flow with a record that can't be matched. Any plant, any product, any technology. Philadelphia Control Systems, the leader in production automation since 1982. 800-335-9811, PCS4automation.com. That's PCS, the number 4, automation.com.
Oh, how I'm longing for the day when I'm back at Orchid Bay, where the silver water glistens in the sun.
When is the last time you raced a small boat across wide open water? Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's ABACO. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
Hi, this is Bob Vide, owner of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Viden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glasper, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittlesportshop.com.
The Obama attack on our Constitution continues. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com and join J.D. Manier and Christina Lamb and hundreds of Reagan conservative commandos who demand our country return to its founding documents and principles. We are part of the nation's oldest and largest GOP volunteer organization, the National Federation of Republican Assemblies. We register voters, endorse conservative candidates, and dig deep to give you the truth on the big issues. We are fighting to do what Lincoln proclaimed 150 years ago. Let the people know the facts and the nation will be free. Help support the Conservative Commando radio show with your donation today. Log on to INRASuperPAC.com. INRASuperPAC.com.
Now hear this. Man your battle stations.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
This is the Conservative Commandos Radio Show with Darian Novak and Rick Trader, and coming to you from WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, the way we do Monday through Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And Daria, we do have our next guest with us, and the honor of the introduction is yours.
Well, today we have Peter Rolfe with us. He's a contributing editor at U.S. News and World Report. Formerly, he served as a senior political writer for the United Press International. Now he's affiliated with several public policy organizations, including Let Freedom Ring and Frontiers of Freedom. His writings appeared in National Review, Fox News' opinion section, The Daily Caller, Political, and elsewhere. Peter, welcome back to the Conservative Commandos Radio Show.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, I was just reading an article that you wrote that I'd like, you to explain to our listeners. It's entitled, Stop Obama from Surrendering the Internet. The House is trying to block an Obama plan to cede control of the Internet. You know, what is going on? I thought we had settled this issue.
No, oh no. To fill everyone in the background, the Internet started as a Defense Department top secret research project of the 1960s. Once the Cold War was winding down, folks realized the enormous potential that the web had to bring the world together in an information community. And so the United States decided that we would share what we had developed with the rest of the world. So they created a company called ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And they're the ones that decide what the top-level domain names are, like .com and .org and .edu. And it's their responsibility to make sure that in different countries that when you type in, for example, to go to my magazine, www.usnews.com, that you go to the website for my magazine, that you don't go to some other site or some other site that pretends to be my magazine. This is a fairly big deal when you realize that this happens hundreds of millions of times an hour, almost without a mistake. Sometimes there's a site down, you get a 404 or 401 error, but they make these connections without a mistake. Well, ICANN runs the Internet under the supervision of the United States government. ICANN is pretty much given a free hand to do what they want. But because ICANN is a U.S. chartered corporation, everything operates under U.S. law, and so our constitutional protections of free speech, freedom of access to the Internet, all of these American values are part of the current Internet governance culture. Well, the Obama administration announced after 5 o'clock on a Friday some months ago that they were going to give the last piece of the Internet to ICANN. And that ICANN would then be the international body in charge of the Internet. Bad enough. But
that
Fadi
sounds scary.
Shahadi, the guy who runs ICANN, when he's in Europe, when he's in Brazil, when he's in other countries, makes noise about moving ICANN's operations out of the United States altogether. Meaning that suddenly the UN could be running ICANN, or that ICANN could, that the Internet could be either Swiss law, or Singapore law, or Malaysian law, or Burmese law, wherever they decided to relocate. A lot of these countries don't have the same concepts that we do about property rights and freedom of speech, and that's part of what makes the Internet work. So it's a very, very important issue for anybody who loves liberty, for anybody who cares about freedom, for anyone who cares about how the internet is democratizing the planet and breaking down dictatorships, that suddenly in somebody else's hands that may end.
It just sounds like a very scary prospect for us. Now, as Americans, we would say the primary purpose of government is to do what individuals can't do for themselves, like national defense, to protect us. Well, obviously, the internet is so integrated into our lives, our economy, our education, every aspect of our lives, that it really, to me, seems like the role of government is to make sure that we have those protections for the internet. So do you understand why this administration would possibly want to give it away to a non-American, possibly non-democratic interest? Is there any logic to it?
You know, you could make an argument that the internet could be operated as a private entity like telephones, like satellite television. But with satellite television, for example, you have problems with certain countries who don't want to let the signals in, and so they jam them. And so having the United States backing up the internet helps guarantee freedom of access. Now, if they go to the global stakeholder model that Fadi Shahadi and others have talked about, the United States becomes one voice among many. Not even the leading voice among many, but one voice among many. And our vote counts as much as the votes of the Russians, the votes of the Iranians, the votes of the Chinese. Now, when they talk about having it actually not run by governmental entities, but by stakeholder communities, you break down those stakeholder communities and think, for example, academia is considered by ICANN to be a stakeholder community. Well, in countries like China and Iran and Russia, you don't rise to positions of prominence and authority in academia without the acquiescence of the government. So in a sense, that's a stakeholder group that then becomes a stalking horse for tyrannical government. And because the processes of ICANN are not transparent, we don't really understand how people become stakeholder groups, which is again another concern in how the stakeholders, the stakeholders representatives getting nominated to the board are done out in the open at international conferences, but all the work that goes into that is largely done in secret, and so it causes us to worry. The bottom line is that it's not simply a matter of we built it, we paid for it, it's ours, but that the internet only works because the American value of freedom of information, of free flow of access, of free speech, of free assembly, of freedom of access is hardwired for the moment into the internet culture. And the concern is that an internet culture run by an ICANN that's located in Geneva or by the International Telecommunications Union, which is a part of the UN, which the Chinese are soon about to be the head of, that all of those freedom concepts could be ripped out of the net. And we could have some very interesting political, economic, religious ramifications.
All right, Daria, let's take a break right now. Peter, can you hold through a 2-minute break?
Sure, be happy.
All right, we are going to take a break. You're listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Daria Novak and Rick Trader, coming to you live from the CCRS studios, that of WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, and of course around the world on the internet. Our guest this segment is Peter Roth. He's a contributing editor at U.S. News and World Report, and we're discussing with him an article that he has up on usnewsandworldreport.com. Stop Obama from surrendering the internet. The House is trying to block his plan to seize control of the internet. Please don't go away. We'll be right back with our guest.
That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I... Oh,
time you raced a small boat across wide open water. Tired of snow, traffic jams, cold weather? You need a refreshing change of scenery, a world away. The Bahama Islands have vacation rental homes and apartments. Enjoy spectacular nature in the Abacos Islands. Enjoy refreshing Caribbean beauty, fishing, snorkeling, scuba, the beach. www.enjoyabaco.com. That's A-B-A-C-O. Enjoyabaco.com.
As I sail across the sea of Abaco, smiling 'cause I know only one more mile to go.
Enjoyabaco.com.
Hi, this is Bob Viden, owner of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glassboro, New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel in many foreign countries, and I've seen what happens to people when they lose their freedom. I wrote this poem. Give us freedom was the cry as they marched throughout the night. At Concord Bridge in Trenton, for freedom they would fight. To build a nation that would last with peace and liberty, it is a job that's never done if we are to be free. They wrote a declaration to announce that we are free, then a constitution for all the world to see. But this is ink on paper. We must make it last. It must always be defended, and that is quite a task. Today the battle rages for freedom in our land. To save our Constitution, we all must take a stand. We must stand up for freedom in our actions every day, and you can stand up with us. Join the NRA. This is Bob Viden of Bob's Little Sports Shop in Glassboro, New Jersey. You may call us at area code 856-881-7575 or visit us online at bobslittle.sportshop.com.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
And a quick program note, if you'd like to hear a rebroadcast of today's show at 10:10 this evening Eastern Time, please log on to patriotsrod.org. And when we end our broadcast, our live broadcast at 5 p.m. this afternoon, if you would like to hear a repeat of yesterday's show, place for that is cprworldwidemedia.com. And you can also hear a rebroadcast of today's show tomorrow afternoon at vigilantlibertyradio.us. Our guest this segment is Peter Roth. He's a contributing editor at U.S. News and World Report. We're discussing an article Peter wrote called Stop Obama from Surrendering the Internet. And the crux is the Obama administration announced it would sever the government's last remaining ties to ICANN, which currently is based in California. And ICANN is the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Peter, thanks for holding through the break. We appreciate your time.
Sure.
You know, Peter, this really cracks me up. You know, if something works reasonably well, in my opinion, it's the internet. So most people say if it's not broke, don't fix it. But government doesn't fix that. Don't think that way, Peter.
No, they don't. And you know, we just had that example in Massachusetts of the healthcare website. They spent $3 million to build the Romney Care website. The Obama administration, and it was working reasonably well. The Obama administration spent another $125 million to update the Romney Care site for Obamacare, and broke it. And now wants another $150 million to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually get very nervous whenever governments get, well, especially this government, gets exposed to computer technology. But in the case of the internet, it's different. Unfortunately, the House of Representatives voted at the end of last week, 229 to 178, to prevent the part of the Commerce Department that oversees the net from spending any appropriated funds next year to manage the transition to a private internet run by ICANN. Now, that's still got to pass the Senate, and it's still got to be signed by the President.
Well, you see, that's what scares me, Peter. It's got to pass the Senate and be signed by Obama. And, you know, Obama has had a way about him of doing what he wants to do recently without regard of what the Congress says. So that shakes me up a little bit.
That's all. That's absolutely true. But you know, this is part of the bill that funds the Departments of Commerce, State, and Justice.
Okay.
The President has threatened to veto
that bill if it has this internet provision in it. So I find it strange that he's so desirous of getting the U.S. out of the internet.
Hey, Peter, you write in your article.
On the State Department and all the embassies and all the embassy security willing to shut down the Justice Department to do it, because if they don't have any money, they can't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you write in your article, there is nothing that improves on the internet by giving control of it to unspecified UN-like organization that will include the world's despots and those with a track record of censoring and punishing opposition views. Peter, who are you specifically talking about when you talk about the world's despots?
The Iranians, the Chinese, the Sudanese, the Egyptians, who shut down the internet during their revolution. The Turks shut down their internet a couple of months ago. The Libyans, the Brazilians are not too happy with the NSA having used the internet to collect metadata and to do other surveillance operations, and so they think the United States should be stripped of its control because of what the NSA did. The Venezuelans, the Cubans, the Nicaraguans, the North Koreans. There are plenty of countries out there where the free flow of accurate information represents a clear and present danger to the continued existence of an oppressive and dictatorial regime.
Peter, in your article, you also talk about another giveaway that the government, and you think, you try to learn from your past mistakes, Peter, but you also talk in your article about another giveaway that the government did at one time, and that was the Panama Canal. And how has that worked for us, Peter Roth?
Well, the canal's still open, and it's actually being widened and improved, but the Chinese now own all the real estate on either side of it, at the entrance and the exit, or I guess both entrances, because you can transit both ways. And so it's never really been tested. But it's cause for concern. What would happen in time of war? What would happen in time of international conflict if we don't own and operate the Panama Canal? Now, the other thing that goes on here with the internet is, that ICANN or the International Telecommunications Union or the UN or anybody else could do all kinds of interesting things that would amount to wealth transfers from the industrialized world to the deindustrialized world. For example, mandating an access fee or an access tax for countries with a GDP above a certain level, so that if you're phone company operating or a cable company operating in the United States or England or Liechtenstein or Singapore or Australia, you have to pay millions in access fees to the internet to pay for the ability of people to access the internet who live in the Philippines or Botswana or Bangladesh or North Korea. And that's really just all about wealth transfer.
Well, Peter, it leads to an interesting question. One of the things that I find in American youth are that they're more cosmopolitan on the one hand, given the internet and communications today, but at the same time, they're also more liberty-minded. Now, I remember when the young people signed a petition that went around the world very quickly on the internet before. They didn't want to lose their music on it and all that. This seems to have become a partisan issue, like a vision of the New World Order, if you will, by this administration. Do you think the youth or any particular constituency or stakeholders will stand up to this? Or has it just become such a partisan issue that it's a done deal?
Well, I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think it's as is the case in a number of circumstances. It's the American people versus their president. His numbers have continued to, job approval numbers and right track, wrong direction numbers continue to be unsatisfactory, continue to fall. And I think that the American people have to understand at a visceral level that the president is giving away the internet. Most of the wealth transfer issues and censorship issues can be decided well above the user level, so that it eventually becomes a fait accompli that is simply passed on to net users. And suddenly someday you may find out that if you're based in a Muslim country, you can't access internet sites in Israel. You may discover that if you happen to travel to China on business, that you cannot access U.S. sites. But you may have to pay $35 to access an internet connection. And that's, again, part of the problem, the lack of transparency in ICANN in terms of what they do and how they reach the conclusions they reach will only serve to obscure further the spread of the global nanny state into the net culture.
So what can anyone do about it at this point? We have a Democrat Senate, we have a Republican House, we've got a Democratic administration in Washington. This seems to be something they want to push through quickly. So what are our options out there?
Well, people need to be calling and writing their legislators. I mean, you need to petition the government for redress of grievance, and our grievance is that the president is trying to give our internet away. Interestingly, it's a bipartisan issue. Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey has said he's not too keen on this idea either, and he's chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He could call a hearing into what they want to do anytime he chose to. But, ultimately, Congress can block this from happening by cutting off the money to do it. The other way is that political pressure can be elevated to such a point that the president has to back away from the decision. Because
so it sounds to me like we need more grassroots people out there doing the work that they've done in the past to try and get this stopped.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, I'm just saying, it sounds to me like we need grassroots people out there to try and stop this, that people like you who are writing articles and making people in the country aware of it are really important. If people want to read more about this and what you're doing...
usnews.com and make it go viral. My editors would be thrilled.
Okay, so everybody hears that. U.S. News and usnews.com. Thank you, Peter Rolfe, for joining us today. Everybody, make sure you do this. Get involved. We've got to save the Internet. Thank you for coming on to the Conservative Commandos radio show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, Daria, and with that, we're getting near the end of our show. I want to thank you, Daria, for sitting in. Always fun to work with you, Daria.
I always enjoy being here.
Okay, I also want to thank our other guests that we've had on today, Jed Babin, Dr. Michael Brown, and our most recent guest, Peter Rolfe. And I want to thank Brett for doing a great job working the boards. But for right now, but don't forget, at 5 o'clock or about 3 minutes from now, our live broadcast ends. So if you'd like to hear a rebroadcast of yesterday's show, please log on to CPRWorldwideMedia.com. That's CPRWorldwideMedia.com. And at 10:10 this evening Eastern Time, if you'd like to hear a rebroadcast of today's show, place for that is patriotsride.org. And you could also hear a rebroadcast of today's show tomorrow afternoon at vigilantlibertyradio.us. Don't forget, you can hear our show anytime, day or night, by calling 832-999-1199. But for right now, we're out of time. We got to run. We got to go. Take care. God bless. And we'll see you tomorrow on the radio.
Thank you for listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show. Huge thanks to our co-hosts, contributors, patrons, callers, and our friends at WNJC 1360 and WIFI 1460, where we broadcast live every Monday through Friday, 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 to 4 p.m. Central. Look for us on the internet at www.ccrshow.com. Until next time, we are the Conservative Commandos radio show, where the newsmakers go to be heard.